Hello, Plant Anglican community. I am Carrie Loughran, and I am the editor for Plant Anglican for the newsletter and website and social media. And today I wanted to share with you an conversation that I had with a friend of mine. It's quite personal for the two of us because it's actually about a story that brought us both together during the planting of their church. Johnny and his wife Amy planted Trinity Church Nottingham about 6 years ago in a former auction house. And since then, they've had an artist paint a large mural on the outside of the building with the word hope in huge letters. And so Johnny and I talked today about hope and the role that that has played as they have been church planting. We hope you enjoy this conversation.
In answer to your question, what's the role of hope been? I mean, I would say that the principal thing that we've experienced is that God has given us trophies of grace and stories of hope, which I suppose we've run into them. People particularly have stumbled across our path who have needed hope or who've discovered hope or have been discovering hope. And their stories, joining with the story of Trinity Church, have released a huge amount of hope into our church and given us a sense that our purpose is to share that. So I'll tell you a couple of stories. I mean, just for a bit of background before we get there, Trinity Church is almost 6 years old, or maybe it is 6 years old. We came here with a team in 2016, September the 1st, 2016. Amy, my wife, and I and our family moved here, and we'd been at HTB in central London, had a great time there on the staff, and I went through sort of ordination training as part of the staff team there, and we were sent out by HTB. And initially the plan was we were going to join a couple who were going to be leading the church, and Amy and I were going to be supporting their ministry and supporting them. And we loved that idea, honestly. We had twins at that point and 2 older children as well. And we just thought it was so overwhelming, the concept of leading anything. And we just thought, we love this couple. They're great leaders. And the idea of sort of supporting them was very exciting. But they discerned, I mean, pretty quickly, really, they discerned it wasn't right for them. And we could see that. I think we all saw that happening. And by the time that we really gone on that journey a bit with them, our hearts were in. We felt like this was too good an opportunity not to take it up, really. And despite the fact we thought it might break us, and we had to face our own stuff in that, my own fear of failure and various other things. But I think we came to a point of saying, look, even if we fail in this is something worth failing at. Like this project, this church, this opportunity is so good, and we feel that God's calling us to it. So we moved here with a team, September 2016, and we spent really about 9 months up until Easter Day 2017, growing a sense of community and worshiping and waiting. That was our strategy, really, was to worship and wait. And we did that for a period of about 9 months, and moved around the city, different buildings, because our building wasn't ready at that point. And I suppose just tried to focus around worship and the presence of God. And we found people were drawn to that. And so we gathered a group of people in that space, in that worship and prayer sort of space, and began to develop a vision and a sense of what God was asking us to do particularly. And it was at that time, and in that time, very early actually, that one of the first stories of hope, which, Kerry, I know you know very personally because you were very involved in it. You were actually involved in it before any of us was, which had to do with a great friend of ours now, Louise. Who's written a book about this, which, she explains it in full in the book. But basically what happened to her was that her husband, George, was dying of cancer, and I think he was 33 at that time, which is the same age I was at that point. And
the same in the midst of me as well, Johnny.
Wow.
Yeah,
didn't know that. I assumed you were a lot younger than me.
Oh, I'll take that compliment. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, in essence, the story is that Louise, in the midst of this, no faith, not really a strong faith background, baptized as a kid, that kind of thing. George didn't really have any faith background, as far as I'm aware. She went into the middle of the countryside and cried out to God in words that I won't publish here or anywhere else. And God answered. God heard her cry, to quote the psalmist, and began to answer her prayer through you, actually. And perhaps you need to tell your story here as much as I do. But because of your obedience to God and you getting a train, and out of nowhere getting a train up to his hospital bed and praying with him, and then connecting me through some of our mutual friends with her, I ended up in their hospital room, just green as you like, not knowing at all what I was doing. And this was probably October, was it? I think it was probably October 2016. So we'd been in Nottingham at this point a month, maybe, not much more.
It was November 2018.
November.
Yeah.
Okay. 2016.
Sorry, 2016. Yeah, it's 2016.
Yeah. So November. So we'd been in Nottingham at this point, sort of a month and a half, 2 months, something like that. I was at the bedside of this lady who was basically, I don't know what Louise was asking me for. I mean, I think by this point she'd encountered God in a way that she had no framework for. And I sat by George's bed, and he had experienced a significant measure of healing in that all of his pain had disappeared. He was still dying, but he had no pain, which was miraculous, as you know. And I sat on his right side. Louise was on his left side. We were both holding his hand. And I mean, I'm not trying to sort of criticize anyone, but nobody told me what you do in this moment, really. So I just held his hand and read Psalm 23. It was about the best I could do, and thinking that I was there to minister to him. And he was just stroking my hand. And as I was praying for him, he was ministering to me, and I was just weeping, which you're probably not supposed to do, but Jesus wept. So who cares what you're supposed to do? And
that's funny because, sorry, just to interject, is I started weeping before I went into the hospital room the first time too. And I thought, yeah, pull it together. I'm here to help. And then I remembered the same exact thing, that Jesus wept, and I just had to go with it.
Yeah. Right. I mean, how do you not cry? I mean, just as an aside, how do we imagine I suppose a professionalism that excludes compassion in moments of suffering like that? I can't personally do that. So perhaps others are called to that. I can't do that. So it was powerful. He ministered to me. It was an amazing thing. Again, as an aside, God really ministered to my fear of death through George's death. And I remember Louise asked me the first time I actually in the room with George. I visited twice. First time, at the end of it, she said, weird question, have you ever done a baptism with a funeral? I didn't have the heart to tell her. I'd never done a baptism or a funeral.
I love that.
Never mind a baptism with a funeral. But it was an incredible thing. I mean, he died a beautiful death, and a good death is a beautiful thing. And through his death, in his death, he came to a faith in God, faith in Jesus, I believe. And he experienced real hope and genuine healing. And she experienced tremendous hope in grief in a way that's been hugely transformative for her family, her two boys, who are dear to us and part of our church. And yeah, I mean, the long story for Louise is her sharing her story of hope now with a broader audience, and that ministering to lots of people. But it ministered to me personally. I thought I was there to be a minister, and I was ministered to, and I was transformed in some way in that moment. And it did something to our church. At this point, our church was a small team of people. And so in a sense, we were able to gather around this story of hope and allow it to transform us. We didn't really have a lot else to do. We weren't running church or running services. So honestly, we grieved, really. I mean, we did. I remember I was sat in this very room, actually. And I came back from meeting her, and I just, lost it, sobbed with our team, and they just ministered to me. It was very powerful. And it was a story of hope, profound hope. And I think that was key. Not long after that, I was walking around our building with a man a wonderful man, actually, called Sir John Peace, who's I always want him to call him the Sheriff of Nottingham. He's not. He's the Lord Lieutenant of Nottinghamshire. So he's the Queen's guy here, basically, and he is just a tremendous person, a beautiful soul. And I was put in touch with him by a mutual friend, a guy called Ken. And we took him around our building, which was basically derelict at this point. And I tried to impress him. I was trying to impress him. I don't know. I probably thought he might, if he was really impressed, he might give to the building project. No funds were forthcoming. And I basically gave him. We put the coffee out. We put a table out. I gave him my very best pitch, all the vision. So he said, "What, Johnny? What's the vision?" I gave him the best spiel. I remembered all the stuff that we learned at Bishop Rick's planting course. I gave him both barrels. He was very unimpressed. He's just stopped me. Literally stopped me when I'm halfway through my patter. He said, "No, Johnny, the vision is hope. People need hope." I was like, okay, the Holy Spirit just showed up. Here was me thinking that I knew what I was doing, or trying to pretend as if I knew what I was doing, a bit like I was in the hospital. And it was almost like God was saying, "No, I want you actually to take the posture of a student here." And here's this other person who's not in your church. I don't know whether Sir John is in the church. I think he is, but he's not in my church. And he's got something to teach you. And it was because of that, really, principally, that we decided to write hope on the outside of our building. And it's interesting, actually, Kerry, because if you look on Google Maps, our church is on there, but there's also somebody's put on there the Hope Shrine. So our church is on Google as also the Hope Shrine. It's like a thing, apparently, in Nottingham. So it's known somehow in the city. So those are two stories of hope. And again, these are things we didn't. Nobody had the idea. Nobody in our church or our team had the idea that we were going to be that hope was going to be sort of the name or emblazoned on the church. But God had the idea. And then there's a third story. A few months after that, we finally got the downstairs space developed. And our bishop, Paul, who's just been an incredible support to the church and to Amy and I personally throughout the whole sort of journey of planting. He basically said, "Look, this thing's growing. There's a momentum. We need to get you in the building. We need to get this thing. We need to do Sunday gatherings." And it was hard to do that because the building was in a real state. It'd been derelict and unused for a long time. It's a former auction house. But he even said, "Look, if we have to put a tent up inside the building, let's do that." So I thought, okay, let's see what we can do. And the diocese supported us, and we went about making the building ready. I mean, to the extent that we did paint parties, and the bishop came, as well as loads of people who were gathering around the vision and everything else. And we painted the inside of the building, and we did the best we could. It was Holy Week 2017, or on Wednesday, just before Maundy Thursday. The building somebody broke in and stole some equipment, which was again just a weird thing that happened. But we did this service on Maundy Thursday. There was an incredible sense of the presence of God, and we prepared then for Easter Sunday to do our first Sunday gathering. And I was stood in the downstairs space where we began to gather, because there's only a small portion of the building that we'd been able to make ready. Most of it was still derelict. And I was in that sort of panic that you feel at your first Sunday gathering and a church plant. And the panic was, what if nobody comes? But it was also, what if too many people come? And I didn't know which was worse. In the end, people came, and just before we were about to start the service, I saw this guy, and I'd never seen him before. And so I made a beeline for him to welcome him to the gathering. And he looked, honestly, slightly disheveled. He looked like he'd come out for the Sunday paper, not like he'd come to church. And that's because he hadn't come to church. And he stood there and he said to me, I don't want a cup of tea. I just want to see what you've done with the place. Well, it's quite an interesting thing to say. The building was known as an auction house. So I thought maybe he's just somebody passing by and he knew it before and such and such and such. So I said, okay, well, you must stay. Please stay with us. He said, no. Just come see what you've done with the place. I will come back there and I've got a story to tell you. Before he went, he said, God's going to do incredible things in this place. And I said, that's good to hear, because I feel really nervous. And he said, no, trust me, I know God's going to do incredible things in this place. Let's go for lunch next week, I'll tell you. Now, in the end, he did stay for the gathering, for the service. And then next week, after the service, he came again and we met, we went for lunch together. And he told me a story, told us a story. And the story was that at the end of 2011, so about 5.5, you can do the maths, almost 6 years before this moment where I met him for the first time. His name's Don. He had a dream. And in this dream, he was driving down Mansfield Road, which is the road on which our church is. And as he was driving past this building, which at this point in real life was derelict, some people walked out of the building wearing all white gowns. And as soon as they came out of the building, they fell down on the floor. And he wondered what was going on. And he stopped his car so he didn't run over them. And he was checking out what had gone on, and he heard a voice, and the voice said, this is the work of the Holy Spirit. And then he could hear another voice. This time it was a minister's voice, a person's voice in the building. So he went through the double doors and through another set of double doors and was standing exactly where I met him in real life, standing in the dream in that place. And he said, the first thing I noticed was worship of the kind I'd never experienced before. And then I could see at the front, exactly as we'd set it up in real life, in the room, I could see a baptism pool, and people were walking into this pool, being baptized and washed and being sent out into the city in a line, in a procession, wearing all white. And as soon as they hit the door, they fell down in the power of the Holy Spirit. This is what he saw in his dream. Quite a powerful dream, but he didn't really do anything with it for a period of time. He told, I think, his wife and a couple of others, his sister, and he took his sister to the building, but not much else because it was derelict and didn't really know what to do with it. About 6 months later, he had another dream. And in this dream, God showed him Isaiah 55, which is like the gospel in miniature. And it's an invitation to people to come to God, to buy food and wine without price, basically to receive for free nourishment from God. And God said to him in the dream, consecrate that place because I will glorify myself there. So he's an obedient prophetic type. The next Sunday, which may have even been the next day, he got up, drove his builder's van to outside the building, which, as I said, was derelict, boarded up, and with oil and opened the Bible in his van, put worship music on and worshipped God, prayed Isaiah 55, and then went and anointed everything he could find, every door, every boarded up window, every cobbled paving, everything. Spent an hour and a half praying over the building, consecrating it for the worship of God. And then thought, well, I've done it. Good job. And then the next week, God woke him up and said, go again. So he did. The next week, God woke him up and said, go again. So he did. In the end, he realized he was to go until he was told otherwise. He went and prayed for our building every Sunday for over 2 years.
Wow. That is incredible.
Isn't it? So when you hear that on your first service or the week after your second service, you start to have some hope.
Yeah.
You start to have some hope that what you're part of isn't just human activity, that you're actually joining in on divine activity, that God is actually doing something, that Louise and Sir John and Don, and we've had other stories since that I could tell you, but I won't for time, where you start to think these stories are all part of something that God is doing. And it's not actually my job to do stuff here. I'm not actually really all that important. I mean, I can partner with this or I can oppose it. Funnily enough, I asked Don, he said once, I'm glad you're a humble man. And I said, oh, that was kind of you. Why? He said, because if you weren't a humble man, I'd have prayed you out.
Oh my goodness. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I was like, I think you would have, and I think it would have worked.
It would have worked. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So to your question, stories of hope began to make us think that there was hope, that this wasn't dependent on us, that God was and is doing something that was about him, not about us. And it was about bringing hope to people who didn't have hope. But Kerry, and this is the important thing, and honestly, I think this so often is lost in the church and in church planting. It had to do with God. It had to do with his presence. And yes, it would flow out in all manner of ways. Yes, it would be social action or compassion, works of compassion. And yes, it would be community and all those good things. But none of those things are the heart of it, are they? It's God. Like what the world needs now is God. What the world needs is more of God. And I suppose God rescued us in some ways and continues to have to do it, I'm afraid, because I'm a stubborn sinner. But he rescued us from the sense that we were doing something here. And that's given me hope. And that story is one all those stories I go back to, and every time I hear them coming from my own mouth, they make me feel hope.
That's amazing. And have you felt like people have responded? I mean, I know it's a physical thing, and that the presence is really what draws them to your community, to your building. But have you found that having that painting on the outside of the building, have you actually seen any stories flow out of that, of people reacting to that?
Yeah, we have. I mean, I think the interesting thing about our building is that it's not a church building, as in it is a church building. It's not a traditional church building. It was something else. It was an auction house. And before that, I just found out recently, it was a roller rink. But the hope sign is a thing that people gather to. And we've heard recently, and this has started happening more in the last year or so, we've had a couple of people beginning to come to church who live in the area, who are just being drawn to the church and made aware that it is a church, even through that sign. Google recognizes the Hope Shrine as a thing that's separate to Trinity Church. It's a place that's recognized in and of itself. So it seems to be developing a life of its own. So yeah, it's got that thing in itself, that sort of, and that's not part of our vision statement particularly, but clearly it's part of our identity in a way that we're not even aware of or in control of.
Thanks so much for being with us for this conversation. We really hope that it has inspired you with what God can do when you worship and wait as your church planting, and hope as a part of the journey. If you'd like to find out more about Trinity Church Nottingham, we will include links to their social media. And also, if you'd like to hear more about Louise's story, this is her book that she wrote, Louise Blythe, Hope is Coming. And we hope that, you are inspired by this journey.